hoodoo, ndu, medicine, healing, root work, conjure, ancestral religion, born of the blood circles of our Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors of West Afuraka, Afurayat-Kayet, Africa, and ancient Afuraka, Afurayat-Kayet, ancient Khanit, those of our family who were forced into North America during the Kwesi, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. However, as we were transported, we brought our ancestral religion with us, and it was upon the foundation of our ancestral religion, upon the foundation of hoodoo, that our revolts against the whites and their offspring, against enslavement, and our subsequent independence through warfare were laid. When we had children, we drew our Nsamanfo, our ancestresses and ancestors, into the womb to return to Asase Afua, our earth mother once again. The knowledge of the religion and culture, the knowledge of hoodoo, was written into their okra, written into their soul, the divine consciousness, by Nyamewa and Nyame, our great mother and great father, supreme being. As they grew and developed, they accessed this ancestral knowledge and incorporated it into every aspect of their lives. This is transcarnational transmission of culture, the intergenerational spiri-genetic transmission of culture, which was and is impervious to being broken through the horrors of the Kwesi enslavement. Hoodoo Mayn, Hoodoo Nation, the restoration of Akan Ancestral Religion in North America, born of the blood circles of our people, the Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors who continue to return. It is through hoodoo that we were sustained, and it is through hoodoo that we will fulfill our function, complete our mission, defeat our enemies, and restore our sacred ancestral order. Okay, so Yachimo, greetings everyone for joining us for Hoodoo Mayn, Hoodoo Nation Festival. This is our 6th annual festival. So typically we have 3 conferences per year. And for those who are unaware, my name is Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akan, Odwirafo of Hoodoo Mayn, Amarukai Tifimu, the Hoodoo Nation in North America. Within Odwira Mayn, the purified nation, Afurakani people in the Western Hemisphere, and also founder of Hoodoo Jasedain, Hearth Shrine of Akan Ancestral Religion in North America. So we have some more people coming in. So as we go through, 1 second. Okay. So typically we have 3 conferences per year. We have our new year begins on the autumn equinox. That's the end of the warm cycle, the beginning of the seeding cycle. That is the beginning of our new year in Akan culture in North America. So September 22nd was the autumn equinox. That was the first day of our new year of 13,021.
100 days before the Gregorian calendar date of January 1st. We do not celebrate time. Of course, we don't track time based on a fictional cartoon character who never existed, Jesus, Yeshua, Yahweh, Esau, whatever name people want to use, or Muhammad, or any other fictional cartoon character. They didn't exist, not black, white, or any other race, form, color, or whatever. So we don't use those fraudulent calendars. We're based our time based on natural cycles occurring in creation. The end of the warm cycle is the harvest time. It is also the beginning of the seeding time, the conception time. So that is the time that we begin our new year. That's the conception. That's the balancing point of the year, 12 hours of sunlight, 12 hours of darkness. And then, of course, the second balancing point of the year is the spring equinox, which is, once again, 12 hours of sunlight, 12 hours of darkness, but that is the sprouting time. What was manifest, what is made manifest at spring is what was germinating and rooting and beginning to emerge from, the fall into the winter. And then that second balancing point is the upswing, the end of the cool cycle and the beginning of the warm cycle. So our new year begins September 22nd, depending on the year. Some years is September 22nd, some years is September 23rd. And we have a 7-day New Year observance, Obrajira, based on this Abosom, the forces in nature that animate the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week in Akan culture. So we have a 7-day observance from September 16th through the 22nd, or September 17th through the September 23rd, depending on the year when the equinox, falls, and that's our new year. And then 3 weeks after our new year, we have our Hoodoo Mayn Hoodoo Nation Festival. So we always have that around mid-October, 3 weeks after the new year. Then in March, we have Akan Ancestral Religious Reversion. So in October, when we have Hoodoo Mayn, the Hoodoo Nation Festival is focused specifically on the Hoodoo tradition. Hoodoo is Akan Ancestral Religion in North America, brought in the blood circles of our Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors in North America specifically. So because that's our tradition, we focus on that as a celebration of our tradition, and we, go into depth about that. But then in March, around the equinox, we have Akan Ancestral Religious Reversion, where we have different representations of the various ancestral religious traditions that were preserved in our blood circles in North America, not just the Hoodoo tradition, which is Akan, the Juju tradition, which is the Yoruba tradition that's preserved in the blood circles of those Yoruba people in North America, which they call the Yoruba tradition Juju, the Voodoo tradition, which was preserved by the Ewe people in North America, the Wanga tradition, which was preserved by the Ovambo people, inclusive of different Gullah people in North America, the Ngangan tradition, which was preserved by the Fang people, F-A-N-G, from Gabon and Cameroon and so forth, who were forced into North America, the Bakongo tradition, and so forth, the Nganga tradition. So various traditions, the Gullah Geechee tradition, which is Gola and Kisi traditions and so forth. Those traditions we maintain in our blood circles, our spiri-genetic blood circles for over 300 years in North America. Those are the various traditions that are represented at the Akan Conference Ancestral Religious Reversion. And then in June, around the summer solstice, we have our Odwirafo Mayn Afashe, which is our nationism conference. We deal with nation building rooted in our ancestral religious values. So Akurakani, African Black nationism, which is the purification of nationalism. So we deal with nation building restoration. That is in June. So we have 3 conferences per year because of what took place with regard to this so-called COVID issue. Beginning in March, we had the Akan conference online for the first time in March. We had the Odwirafo Mayn conference online for the first time in June. And then, of course, we're having Hoodoo Mayn online as well. Now, by the time we get, back to March next year, or for them next year, but for us, it's already 13,021. We should be able to have our normal conference at a venue. Typically with Hoodoo Mayn, we have a number of vendors. We have a full day of events. We have, presenters throughout the course of the day, vegan food and so forth. So it's a full day of events. It's a, family-friendly event and so forth. We will get back to that. So, but this is the time for Hoodoo Mayn. So when you look at the flyer, and just to give some background, Hoodoo comes from the Akan term Undu, which means medicine, from roots, trees, plant life, and we're going to get into some detail about that tonight. But undu also means to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. So that Akan term, specifically in the Akwamu Akan dialect, undu, came to be pronounced hoodoo by our people, our Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors who were forced into North America. We continue to practice our ancestral religions, expressions and so forth. And we were powered and guided by the Abosom, the divinities, the deities that are connected to our blood circle, and our Nananom Nsamanfo, our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of our direct spiri-genetic blood circle. We were guided by the Nsamanfo and empowered by the Abosom on the best means by which to wage war against the whites and their offspring, our enemies, exterminate them, and free ourselves from enslavement. So we not only healed ourselves with regard to medicinal use of herbs and not only plant life, animal life, mineral life, and so forth, but healed our communal body from enslavement, forced the end of enslavement, established independent Black towns and so forth, hundreds of independent Black towns that was powered by ancestral religion. Akan people practicing the Akan tradition, Hoodoo, Yoruba people practicing the Yoruba tradition, Juju, and so forth. So, but because this is our Akan tradition, we have to properly understand and properly identify the tradition. If you understand the identity, the cultural identity of the tradition, then you can understand the ritual practices, you can understand our approach to life as Akan people and so forth. And it's also, it gives, implies and infers, and it gives some insight to other traditions, other Afro-Akani traditions. We all inform one another. So when Yoruba people who practice Juju and invoke the divinities under the form of Orisha, when they study Akan people practicing Hoodoo, invoking the same divinities under the form of Abosom, which is the Akan term for deities, and they see the approach that we use and the specific expressions that we use and the culture that revolves around the Abosom and so forth, it simply informs what they're doing. When we study their expression of the divinities as Orisha and the stories of the Orisha, that simply informs and confirms what we're doing. And the stories of the Abosom and so forth confirms their stories of the Orisha, the qualities of the Orisha and what they represent and so forth, and how they manifest through possession and communication. They find when they study Akan Abosom, they're studying the same divinities in a different cultural expression, but it strengthens and informs what we're doing. So we have a pan-African in that context, exchange of information. And we use the proper term African. Black Pan-Africanism is inherent within that proper term. So let's go through a little bit of information. And because, of course, this is a modified version, our sister Afia Nkoso Bretuo, she did a video presentation. I'm going to show that. We're going to show that presentation first. We're going to have a question and answer at the end of the both sessions. So I'll show her video presentation. I will do a presentation as well on a different aspect of the tradition. And then we'll have a question and answer, and she's going to be in the chat room as well. And she'll be able to jump on with us live and answer questions as well. So, but first, you may have seen that we said the Akwamu Nation in North America, Akwamu Mayn Amarukai welcomes the community to our 6th annual HOODOO Mayn Hoodoo Nation Festival, sponsored by and directed by Hoodoo Jasedan. Some of you have seen our website. Hoodoo Jasedan means the hearth shrine of Akan Ancestral Religion in North America. And this, of course, is on our website. So, as we say, Hoodoo is the Akan term undu. Let me make sure. And once again, if there's any issues with the images showing up, let me know in the chat room right away so we can rectify that. So, Hoodoo is the Akan term undu, as you can see here, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. It also means become heavy with the spirit and so forth. As we mentioned, we have our book, Hoodoo People. Now, and some of this information we just went over, but we want to get down to this piece here. Akan language and cosmology is preserved in the terms defining our ancestral religious practice as hoodoo in North America, including hoodoo, which is undu, mojo, which comes from the Akan term moja, jack and jackbog, which comes from jak and japadiye in Akan, conjure or kanje comes from Kankye, the Akan term Kankye. The term haint, as in a haint spirit, comes from the Akan term Hintin. The shout, as in the ring shout, comes from Sho or Jo in Akan. The gopher doctor or Gufa doctor with the Gufa dust and so forth comes from the Kumfo doctor or Kumfo priest or priestess. Johnny Kakaduru or Johnny Conqueror root, but Johnny Kakaduru, the High John the Conqueror and so forth, comes from Nyamma Kakaduru in Akhan, and we're going to go into detail about that tonight. Kam comes from Akon, when the spirit comes and so forth. So all of these terms are phonetically and cosmologically Akan terms defining our ritual practices preserved in North America. And we're going to get into some more detail about that later, but this shows why we must properly define the tradition. Many people talk about hoodoo as a conglomeration of various ritual practices, bits and pieces and fragments preserved from different African traditions that were cobbled together over the past few hundred years as we try to preserve our traditions. And some will try to say it has something to do with pseudo-Native Americanism or pseudo-European occultism all combined. That is pure foolishness. That is totally inaccurate. Hoodoo specifically came from Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors. When they were forced off of the boats, they continued to speak their language. They continued to communicate with the same abosom, the same deities in the same fashion. They got possessed by the same divinities in the same fashion. They continued to communicate with their Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors in the same fashion. And they passed that culture down intergenerationally and transcarnationally to us, to their posterity. And we still have these ritual practices. And we still communicate with those very Akan Ancestresses and Ancestors who were first brought over here, as well as the ones who remained on the continent. And many of us are some of those who in a previous existence were the ones who were snatched up and brought over here. And we have an ancestral memory of having been on the boats, having been on the plantations, having freed ourselves from enslavement, having previously hundreds of years ago lived in a specific village on the continent, speaking a specific language and engaged in specific ritual practices. So for example, if we go back and return and make a trip to the continent and we know who we are, we're not just going to learn how to quote unquote be African. We're already Afro-Akani people. We're drawn not only ancestrally to the specific village that we used to walk around in 400 or 500 years ago, but we also go back to that ancestral grove, that Nsamain Po, that ancestral grove where we were buried as elders and eldresses, and the body we used to inhabit is still buried in that ancestral grove. And we go to that area because that's a shrine for us. That's a former physical body we used to live in. And now we're going back to that area. We're drawn to those areas to make certain ritual libations and ablutions and other things. So we're going to get into some more of that a little bit later, but we just wanted to show a couple of other things. So we talked about hoodoo, jase. Ja means fire, ase means under, so that means under the fire, that means the hearth, and so forth. Odain means a house, native house in Akan. Dain also means to apply, to seek the protection, or put oneself under the protection of. Dain also means to turn, to give another direction, inclination, to change or transform. For example, it says Obayifo, Dain, Neho, Osebo. It's not a wizard, but the spiritualist transforms himself into a leopard spiritually and so forth. So Jase is the Akan term meaning hearth. The Oja means fire. Under the fire, the foundation of the fireplace and so forth. This is a hearth, as you can see. Odain means the room, the house of the dwelling. So that's the shrine house. It means a house, but also for Abosom Dain means the house Dain of the Abosom, the divinity. And Samain Dain is the house Dain of the ancestral spirits and so forth. So Jase Dain is the hearth house or hearth shrine. But dine, as we said, also means to place oneself under the protection of and also to transform into another state of being. So Hoodoo Jase Dine is the name of our Akan shrine house in North America. It's a shrine space, protective, transformative dwelling of the hearth, Jase of Hoodoo. So what we would do, and of course we are Akumfo, warriors, warrioresses, and so forth, escape from plantations, establish independent settlements. When we would escape into a specific settlement, burn down the plantation, kill the slave master, kill his wife, kill his children, burn down the plantation, or free our people and establish an independent nation. For example, we have some images. This is Dismal Swamp in Virginia. We established an independent sovereign nation, different Afurakani people over the course of time, at some point over 2,000, 3,000 people living in the Dismal Swamp. There were areas that were swamp areas, of course, but then there were areas that were clearings where we were engaged in agriculture, growing rice and other crops and so forth, lived there for hundreds of years. When the Whites and Offspring sent their militias in to try to drag us back into enslavement, we had a formidable army and we remained independent intergenerationally, meaning once we escaped and went into the Dismal Swamp, built homes, established agriculture, armed ourselves and so forth, procured medicine from plant life and mineral life and animal life and so forth, intergenerationally, meaning their children of those who escaped and established themselves, freed themselves, their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren never were enslaved. This is during the quote-unquote 1700s, 1800s, and so forth. You had generations of people who had freed themselves and were not enslaved and defended themselves, while 100 miles away or 50 miles away, there were other people who were still on plantations being enslaved. But because of what our warrior ancestresses and warrioress ancestresses and ancestors did, they were able to free their people, which led to a forced war against the Whites and their offspring that became the Civil War. We talk about the Gullah Wars, so-called Seminole Wars, but these were the Gullah Wars and so forth, against the United States Army that forced the Civil War to come into being. And then our people engaged that, that major offensive and so forth to exterminate as many of the whites and their offspring as possible. And that forced the end of enslavement. So we moved that needle across, the landscape in reality to free ourselves, free this entire continent. We had other areas. Other groups may have been on a specific island or specific area, and they freed themselves from enslavement in that area. We had to liberate this entire North American continent. So we had a different charge and a different approach, and our people did that. And after that, then we established independent Black towns for the next 100+ years and so forth, even into the 50s, 60s, and some of these towns still exist. So we're going to get into that as well. But when you see this image of the Jase, the hearth, when we escape into a free area that we established, we would first go to the hearth, not only for food, not only to cook food, and of course also to cook medicine, but also and to make medicine and so forth, but also to purify ourselves, purge ourselves from the pollution of living that kind of life in the close proximity with our enemies, these spirits of disorder, the Achiwadiepo, the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, purge ourselves of those experiences, purge ourselves of those injuries, purge ourselves of those mindsets, those conditionings, so we can move into the free territory with a clean spirit, so we can interact harmoniously, not dragging any misguided, foolish ideas, misguided desires, and so forth into the new settlement. So it was a place of purification, it was a place of nourishment, it was a place of healing, it was a place of recalibration. So that's what the Jase, the hearth, is about on a mundane level and a spiritual level, and this is why the name of our shrine, our authentic Hoodoo Akan shrine house or temple, is Hoodoo Jase Dine. So we're gonna switch over. Give me 1 second. I want to check to see. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to go to the video presentation that our sister Afia Nkoso Bretuo submitted, and we're going to go check that out. Afia has a book coming out, Art of the Talisman. And we go down the page, the Hoodoo Jasedain page. You see, for example, this is Afia here. You'll see us down here under Adebisa or Divination Services. So that's one of the services provided within Hoodoo Jasedain, our shrine house and so forth. You see Afia here. And you see the links to our website. You see myself here. So Afia has a book coming out called The Art of the Talisman. The term talisman in Akan is sumain or asumain, and people who are fashioners of talismans and impregnate those talismans, those asumain, with ritual power coming from the energy, the tumi of the abosom, the divinities, as well as the nanonom and samanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. And those talismans become portable shrines, you know, resonating the power of specific configurations of energy. Just like we need, you know, you take certain vitamins and minerals to repel and, you know, destroy any bacterial or viral agents and so forth. We have ritually prepared implements that can repel negative projections, restore ourselves, realign ourselves, and so forth, for a number of different reasons. So those who impregnate these miniature shrines or shrines in miniature, these asumain, are called asumain fo. That includes ritual medicine, that includes divination, that includes spirit possession, sometimes spirit communication, a number of different things. It's not just, you know, these aren't just sentimental pieces that remind us of something. When we utilize them on the shrine or charge them on the shrine, or they're ritually impregnated, then they become a magnet for the tumi, which is the Akan term for divine power, same as Ashe and Yoruba, the tumi of the abosom, the deities, the tumi of the Nsamanfo, the ancestresses and ancestors. So in her video, she's going to talk about the art of the talisman and some information about the way her book is structured and some ritual practices. And then we're going to come back. So, okay. So what we have done with the Hoodoo Mayn Festival, the first 3 festivals, what we did was the festival's always free to attend, and then we you know, as we said, we have vendors and so forth, but we also gave away a free copy of our Hoodoo Mayn Hoodoo Nation Festival journal the first 3 years that included information about the tradition, some articles, as well as a list of the vendors and so forth, our Egua marketplace vendors and so forth, as well as other Black businesses. So in some of the pieces, in some of the articles, we touch on, you know, various aspects of the tradition. And the presentation I'm doing tonight is the etymology and cosmology of the tradition. So this is the Hoodoo Mayn Hoodoo Nation Journal 13,018. There's a specific article we want to touch on initially. Now, Nyamma and Kakaduru, Akan origin of High John the Conqueror, the man in the root revealed. So this is important in the larger context. Some individuals have been under the impression that hoodoo, for example, the term hoodoo and ritual practices and so forth, come from the Congo, or some people try to say it came from the Fon people, or they come up with all these different ideas. Typically, they'll try to say it comes from the Congo people or the Dogon people. And the reason for that is typically they're reading what white writers have published, and they're repeating what white writers and sometimes so-called linguists have published, but they don't really understand the tradition. They have fragments of the tradition that they learned from their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so forth, and other relatives and other people connected with them, but they don't have the cosmological foundation for the tradition and don't have the proper ethnic designation, the ethnic root of the tradition. So reaching for, you know, explanations that are actually inaccurate and trying to make them accurate, that is the order of the day. One of the reasons we were moved to not only publish on the proper, you know, accurate information, but also establish the Hoodoo Mayn Hoodoo Nation Festival. Before we did that over, you know, 6 years ago, the only, you know, yearly festival that was a quote unquote large festival was a so-called Hoodoo festival on the West Coast, established by some crackers, you know, talking nonsense, of course. Hoodoo is Akan Ancestral Religion. If you are not Akan, then you can't practice Hoodoo. What you're doing is, even if you're Black, you're imitating another Afro-Akani ethnic group, as opposed to embracing your own ancestry, communicating with your own great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers who are there ready to communicate with you, letting you know exactly what your ancestral expression is, what your matriclan is, what your patriclan is, and the divinities that were born into the world with you, and expressing yourself through your own spiri-genetically inherited culture. You will be neglecting all of that, trying to imitate what you've seen that may appear to be popular. So even if you're a Black person, but you're not Akan, you're really not practicing Hoodoo, you're imitating somebody. If you're Yoruba, then Juju is your tradition. You reincorporate the Juju tradition that was born of your blood circle. What Orisha were you born into the world with? How do you align with them? Connect with your direct blood ancestresses and ancestors, those going back multiple generations, as well as some who are closer and so forth, to reestablish your tradition. You don't have to follow someone else's tradition. You are born into a tradition. You incarnate into a tradition. That's like liver cells who are part of the liver community and children of the great liver divinity. That is a child of the great being, which is you, and so forth. If the liver cells start saying, I want to, you know, operate like the spleen cells and so forth, because they don't know that they're part of a larger organ called the liver, and they have specific functions. If they were never taught that, they're like, I don't have any identity. I'm just a body cell, so I just want to imitate what other body cells are doing. Hey, I like what the spleen is doing. I'm going to start acting like them. That's the position that we've been placed in, you know, artificially by our enemies, the whites and our offspring. So when we awaken culturally, we reconnect with our own ancestresses and ancestors, some of whom are assigned to us pre-incarnation by the Supreme Being. Nyame, the great mother, great father, was also called Amenet and Amen, the great mother and great father, Supreme Being, and so forth. They assign a specific ancestor or ancestress, one of the Unsamampo, one of the spiritually cultivated class of Unsamampo ancestresses and ancestors, to guide us throughout the course of our lives. That's pre-incarnation. Therefore, when you are born into the world, you have an ancestor or ancestress from your matriclan, patriclan, and so forth that will give you guidance. You also are born into the world with specific abosom forces in creation that govern your Kra, or Krawa, the spiritual head, the divinity in the head region, as well as your matriclan and patriclan and so forth. So you have abosom, quote unquote Orisha, but on Akan, that's abosom forces in nature that define you, and you have an ancestral community that guides you. So you are born into the world with that. Nobody can give you that. Nobody can give you that from a ritual on the continent. You can't get that from Nigeria. You can't get that from Ghana and so forth. Hold on one second. You can't get that from someone performing an initiation and so forth. You can't receive an Orisha. You can receive a shrine, but you can't receive an Orisha, receive an abosom, receive a Vodou. You can't receive a deity from anyone. The abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou are assigned to us pre-incarnation by the Supreme Being. They assign them to our spirit. They are installed within our spirit, and then we are sent into the womb through Bebra, the Akan term for reincarnation, to come back into the world again and bring that energy into our matriclans, patriclans, and so forth, into our community. And even if we're born into a community through a specific line where the culture is not strong or was not preserved and so forth, we come into the world with the culture, and at some point we begin to awaken. And we have that ancestor or ancestress who will guide us and so forth. So this is why it's important to know the, you know, cultural root of the tradition you're born of, as well as other traditions as well. We saw the whites in our offspring, our enemies, creating a little hoodoo festival. You have white crackers and dissexuals, homosexuals, and Negroes who are following behind these white dissexuals, homosexuals, and so forth, pretending like they're practicing the hoodoo tradition, which of course they're not. None of the whites in our offspring, whether they're white Europeans, white Americans, white Arabs, white Hindus, white Hispanics, white pseudo-Native Americans who are just Asians who invaded this hemisphere when Afro-Akani people, African Black people were here thousands of years before Asians existed on Earth. So whether it's white Asians, white Europeans, white Arabs, white Hindus, white Americans, white, whatever it is, non-Black people are incapable racially or spiritually of practicing any expression of any Afro-Akani or African ancestral religion, without exception. They do not have the spiritual apparatus to be able to attune to the forces in nature. They do not have a Krawa divinity in the head region. They don't have a a divine living energy within them. They have no connection to any forces in nature. They're no different than, and they exactly are the cancerous cells that develop within the body. The billions of cells in your body operate naturally. Less than 1/100th of a percentage of those cells at some point become cancerous because of radiation or different things, or pollution, or different viral agents that enter the body and so forth, and they become degraded, disfigured, and begin to malfunction within inside the body. And your immune and lymphatic systems, the response is they isolate those cells, then they destroy them, kill them, and then expel them from the body. And this is why you continue to function. It's not because you don't have any cancerous cells that develop in the body. Everybody has that, but your immune and lymphatic system does their job, isolates, kills, and expels. When cancerous cells develop within the communal body, the Afro-Akani or African Black body, and in our course where we deal with this, talk about melanin and talk about the origin of the Afro-Akani human being and where the whites and offspring degenerated from and so forth, these cancerous cells developed within the great Black body on Earth and so forth, and they began to proliferate out of Northern Eurasia, began to spread, metastasize in every community of us they came in contact with, whether it was in Southern Europe, Africa, the Near East, India, Asia, and so forth, North Central South America, thousands of years ago. Wherever they have gone, they have sought to consume and destroy, just like cancerous cells seek to consume and destroy. And the response, the naturally guided response to cancerous cells is to isolate them, kill them, and expel them. The immune system doesn't set up, Black Lives Matter chants and hold the hands of cancerous cells. They kill the cancerous cells and expel them. That is the divine response. So this is why the whites in our offspring cannot practice any form of ancestral religion. Any one of them who are claiming to do so are frauds. Now, but you also have so-called academics, and you have Black people repeating what these academics are saying, and then they take it on as their own, and they began to misinform people about the tradition. And that's the various traditions, inclusive of hoodoo. High John the Conqueror, this specific root, is one very poignant example. But we want to start off with what we say in the beginning. We give a list here of specific terms. We're dealing with the etymology and cosmology of the hoodoo tradition. Undu, in the Akan language, is the term hoodoo. Kankye, in the Akan language, is the origin of the term conjure. So sometimes people say I practice hoodoo, some say I practice conjure. When they heard people in the South saying, hey, the tradition I practice with a Southern dialect, they would say, I practice Kankye, and the European would write it conjure. This is what the Negro really meant to say because they don't speak very well. So they said Kankye, C-O-N-J-E-H, Kankye. But they have a Southern dialect. What they really meant to say was conjure. So they would write it conjure. But we were saying Kankye. The term haint comes from the Akan term hinti. The term mojo comes from moja. The term jack and jackball comes from jat and japadye, as we said before. Komfo produced gofa and gopher and so forth. Jo produced shout and shout and so forth. So we say these terms are phonetically, conceptually, and thus cosmologically defined properly only within Akan language, culture, and cosmology. They are all interrelated, not only phonetically, but culturally and ritually, because they're all connected. For example, the mojo and the jack as ritual talismans and so forth. One carries matriclan energy, the mojo, one carries patriclan energy, the jack, and they are interrelated. There's no disassociation from them. And there's a balance between the two. Some people just think, oh, mojo, they'll say mojo comes from the Congo people and so forth, totally inaccurate. So, and we list a number of titles. Hold on 1 second, there are people trying to get in the chat room. Okay. A list of titles within the Akan tradition, a list of ritual, spiritual titles, functions that are carried out by specific spiritualists within the tradition. We see Odun Sinifo, Unsin means root, medicine, Undu, which later became Hoodoo and so forth. The Odun Sinifo is the group of people who have the Undu, the medicine, from the Unsin, the roots. These are the root medicine people, or the root doctors. Odwirafo, to work, ye in Akan, the Undu, the medicine, and also the heaviness, Undu, the root workers. Then you have Komfo, to become possessed and so forth. And when we become possessed, we put powder on the body, the white powder or charcoal and so forth, the different powders and so forth. The Komfo became the Gofo and the Gofa doctor, utilizing the Gofa dust in the Hoodoo tradition. The Odumafo means to give, Undu, the medicine and so forth. Udumafo is the group. Udumani is the medicine giving and also divining and so forth, the diviner. So the Udumani became the Hoodumani and Hoodoo man and so forth. Kankye, to utter speak incantations to bring forth the spirits. Che, the conjure man, conjure woman. Kankye man, Kankye woman. Akan man, Akan woman, who was the Kankye man. Kankye woman became the conjure man, conjure woman. But then they began to denigrate those titles, just like they would take the term voodoo, which is from the Ewe language, voodoo, and that means a deity, a divine force in creation. They would say that the term voodoo means evil or charlatan. So a voodoo man or voodoo woman means a charlatan. Actually, a voodoo woman or voodoo man means an Ewe man, an Ewe woman who's possessed and communicates with the voodoo, the divine forces in creation. So they started turning the terms, the white snarl spring, voodoo, juju, hoodoo, wanga, into terms that simply meant negative, charlatan, devil, all this kind of nonsense. So an Akan man or Kankye man, Kankye woman, Akan man, Khan woman, those are the ones who utilize medicine to poison the white snarl spring in their sleep while they were eating food and so forth, kill them, burn down the house, burn down the plantation, free themselves. So they started trying to say Akan man, Khan woman became Khan man, like C-O-N, Khan man, or Khan woman. If someone was selling medicine or providing medicine, hoodoo and so forth, they say, oh, they're doing that hoodoo. That's a Khan man or Khan woman. But originally this is an Akan man, an Akan woman, a Kankye man, Kankye woman. So let's get into some more detail about that. First, we're going to get into proper definitions of the actual term, proving where hoodoo comes from. And the books that we have are free downloads. All 31 of our books are free downloads from our website. And this is our book, Hoodoo People. And a number of years ago, our Unsamafo directed us to publish the first article, the Akan origin of the term hoodoo. And we go into more detail in the book. So starting off with that term first. And until we published this article, first it was an article we included in the book and then expanded upon it. No one knew the origin of the term hoodoo, and no one knew what ethnic group the practice came from. Everybody assumed it was either the Congo, you know, some will say Ebe and phone and so forth. Some would throw Yoruba in there and so forth, and things like that. But outside of that, they didn't know. And then, of course, you have crackers who would try to say it came from Ireland and all kinds of nonsense. They're talking about the word hoodoo comes from Ireland, which is ridiculous. So we were the first to definitively and conclusively prove the reality. Not only the Akan term in North America, same definition in Akan, but also going back to ancient Khanid and Kemet with the exact same term, with the exact same meaning. So you said the Akan term for medicine, Nduru, in a specific dialect. There are two major dialectical variants in the Asante dialect. So you have the Akan people, and there are subgroups of the Akan. The Asante people, often pronounced Ashanti, but they are the Asante people. They're the largest Akan group. Then you have the Fanti people, who are the second largest Akan group. Then you have the Denchara, you have the Akwamu, which is the group we are from. You have the Wasa, you have the Bono, you have a number of different Akan groups. In the Asante dialect, which is one of the more popular dialects of the Akan language, or the Tree language, the word for medicine is spelled Nduru, Nduru, and sometimes it's Nduru or Nnuru, Nduru, and so forth. But in the Akwamu dialect, which is the Akan group that we are from, as well as the Ekweapem dialect, which comes from the Akwamu dialect, the term is pronounced Ndu. In Asante is Nduru, in Akwamu is Ndu. It is the medicine, the Ndu, is derived principally from Ndua or Ndria, as you see here. And that word Ndua or Ndria means trees, sticks, plants, roots. So you have medicine, Ndu, in the Akan language, Akwamu dialect. The medicine Ndu is derived from the Ndua, from the Ndria, the trees, sticks, plants, roots. Now, so there's the term du and duru. Now, we said it means heavy in weight. It also means to descend, alight, come down upon. That references the spirit descending, alighting, coming down upon. When you hear these people talking about hoodoo comes from the Congo word for boiling or something like that, that's nonsensical. We have undu, literally meaning medicine. Undu, literally meaning to become heavy with the spirit. The medicine undu comes from the undua, which is a direct connection to the trees, plants, roots, and so forth. But it also, undu also means to descend, alight, to come down upon. That references the descending, alighting, coming down upon an individual during spirit possession, causing the individual to experience spiritual heaviness, weight, power. This is also why the Akan word for gravity is oduru in the Asante dialect, odu in Akwamu. So then extended upon that root to further prove that reality is the Odwirafo in Akan. The term fo, the suffix fo, means plurality, as in a group of people. It's similar to the English term folks, but it's fo. So Odwirafo is one of the group of people, fo, who engage the Oduye process. The one who ye, to make or do, in Akan is ye. And medicine, undu. So they make or work, ye, to make or do, ye, that's the work you're doing. The medicine, undu, with roots, plants, undua, undria. They're typically referred to as physicians, but they're the herbalists. They know the medicinal use of thousands of plants and so forth, because they attune to the spirits and plants, as well as minerals and so forth, but attuning to the spirits and plants, learning which plant, from that plant, that spirit, what kind of ailment they're good for, what kind of energy is emerging from that plant. Can it disrupt the disordered energy brought forward by a certain bacterial or viral agent? They can attune to communicate with the spirit of that plant to know, okay, I need to heal this person with this particular plant, or this combination of this plant and another. George Washington Carver, who we call Nana Kwame Afrani, he was a well-known contemporary example of a hoodoo man. He talked about the reason why he was able to transform agriculture in this country and around the world, generating hundreds of, products from peanuts and sweet potatoes and so forth, and dealing with crops and crop rotation that transform the nature of agriculture in this country and around the world. He didn't get his information from studying at the university in Iowa and so forth. He did that, but he said he got all of his information by getting up early in the morning, going out into nature, communicating with the spirits in nature, within plant life and so forth, and then bringing that information back into the lab and replicating what he learned directly from spirits in nature. So he was a hoodoo man. He was engaged in the same work our people have been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So Odwirafo, one of the group of people who makes or works the Hoodoo medicine. This is because of their capacity to call on the spirits to descend, alight, come down, do, or duru, when making medicine, Hoodoo, including making medicine with trees, plants, roots. This is the conjuring of the spirits of the Nsamanfo, the Ancestresses and Ancestors, and the Abosom, the divinities. So the function of the Odwirafo and Odun Sinifo is the root worker, conjurer, and the root doctor. Now we look in the Asante Fanti dictionary, you see do or do, aduru or eduru, powder, medicine, drug, physic, and so forth. This medicine is for his sickness. And note that this Asante Fanti dictionary was written in the late 1800s by a Swiss missionary in the forest in the Akwiapim and Akwamu region in Akhan land and so forth, translating the language, sitting with the people and translating the language. What is this? What is this plant? What is this animal? What do you call this? And compiled a 600+ page dictionary in the late so-called 1800s. So Mdu, meaning medicine, from the Mdua, roots, trees, plants, and so forth. But then we go to ancient Kemet, the hieroglyphic dictionary. You have Uten. Now, the actual spelling is U-T and N. Egyptologists in the early days, they would stick an E in between consonants. If a word is spelled U-T-N, they don't know if it's Uton, Utin, Utan. They didn't know the vowel placement. So it was convention in Egyptology to stick an E in between consonants when they're trying to translate text, just to make it flow, until one day they could figure out what the real vowel placement is. So when you look in older dictionaries, you'll see E's in between consonants in various words because they weren't sure what vowel should go. If they will find out later, then they will place the vowel in there, but they will put the E as holding the place until they could find out what the vocalization was. Hold on a second, I want to make sure. Okay, so somebody was saying that the screen, somebody was saying the screen didn't switch over to the Hoodoo book. So let me see, let me switch that around. Now let me see, can you see the Hoodoo People book on the screen now? Well, let me switch it back. So is it showing now? You should see the image of Hoodoo People. Okay, cool. So I appreciate that. So yeah, anytime you see that it's not popping up, just let me know and then we can do that little quick fix. So what we're saying is, so this is the Hoodoo People book. That's the cover. Hoodoo People, Afro-Akanu, Afro-Akanu, Africans in North America, Akan, custodians from ancient Hoodoo, Undunu land, Kanit, Nubia. So that's the book. All right. And what I was just touching on here, So we talked about the Odwirafo, the one who makes the medicine, works the medicine, that's the conjurer, the root worker, and so forth. The Odun Sinifo, the root doctor, and so forth. In the Asante Fonte Dictionary, you see do as well as do, duru, the different dialectical variants, duru as well as do, the root of the term medicine. Then we talked about in the hieroglyphic dictionary, it's not uten, they would stick an E in between consonants when they didn't know what the vowels should be, but it's really spelled U-T-N. But we know what the vowel placement is because we have the actual language, the same language. When we've written an article about this, but we're compiling a comparative dictionary, thousands of words in Akan language, all of them you will find in the hieroglyphic dictionaries because it's the same language that we continue to speak. So it's really udum, it says fat, grease, and so forth. Let's go a little bit further. So we said the undu, medicine comes from the undua, the trees, the plants. Here's dua, to plant, to put into the ground. Edua, plant, tree, shrub, stem or stalk of a plant or its leaf or fruit. Then you have the same term, they think it's uten, meaning a kind of tree. Uten, a kind of fat or grease, but in this jar here that you see that represents a jar that holds fluid, in this context, medicine and so forth. So that's the undum, really not fat or grease, but medicine. And then the same word, undum, a kind of tree. That's in ancient Khanate Kemet, so-called Nubian Egypt. In Akan, undu is medicine from roots, trees, plant life, and undua, undu also is the trees, the plants, the stalks, and so forth. When they say fat or grease, and he puts a question mark, the Egyptologists, they're not sure, but this is from the Ebers Papyrus. The Ebers Papyrus in ancient Kemet is a very famous papyrus because it's the medical papyrus. It's one of those papyri that was found talking about various forms of medicine and how we practice medicine. So within the Ebers medical papyrus, there's a term undum showing, you know, a vessel that's holding a substance, and they say fat or grease, but it's dealing with medicine, the medicinal use of quote unquote fat or grease. When we look in our Akan tradition, shea butter called unku is often referenced as fat or grease by Europeans, but we also use it medicinally, we also utilize it ritually. So we show that portion. Then you have ut and utu, meaning plants, vegetables, a kind of plant, and so forth. The three plants in a row represents the plural, so that ut becomes utu. So you already have undu and unduru, two different Akan dialects, both of them meaning medicine. The Akwamu dialect is undu, and the Asante dialect is unduru. It was the Akwamu people's dialect that became popular in North America. That's why we call the tradition hoodoo. If it was a Asante people's dialect, we would be calling the tradition hoodoo. But because it was the Akwamu people, we call it hoodoo from undu. So undu and unduru, medicine, medicinal substance. In Kemet, it's untun and untunu, medicine, medicinal substance. Undua, tree, plant, plants in Akan. Utun and untunu, tree, plant, plants in ancient Kemet. Then we go further. Odun Nsine is the stump of a tree. Odun Nsini, the native physician, medicine man, charmer, sorcerer, wizard, and so forth. This is written in the so-called 1800s and so forth. So the Odun Sini foe, or the Odun Sini individual, the one who engages, takes the plants and the stumps of trees and so forth and makes medicine and so forth. This is the Odun Sinifo, is the physician, the herbalist, the medicine person. The Odun Sinifo, the one who is the root doctor. Then you have, again, you have Odwirafo, they'll say physician, doctor. Odwirafo, once again, you have both dialects represented. Odwirafo, that would be the Akwamu way of saying it. Odwirafo, that would be the Asante way of saying it. But to give further definition, the term duru also means heavy weighted. This signifies strength, a heavy chest. One has heart or courageous. The term for health or strength is one who has a hard body, or his spirit is heavy. Sum sum yeduru, the spirit is heavy, has weight, and so forth. So heaviness, weight, solidity. We saw duru meaning medicine, but you also have duru meaning heavy, weighty, ponderous. And then you have the dialectical variant here, du. So duru meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. Duru meaning heavy, weighty, ponderous. But we also saw that what they thought was uten was really untun, also meant medicine. It also meant trees and plants. But uten from ancient Kemet, which is really untun, also means to be heavy or weight. So you have the same word that means medicine is also the same word that means heavy or weight, utun, in ancient Kemet. You have the same word that means medicine, undu, and Akan is also the same word that means heavy or weight, undu. But then it goes further, because when you have the T with the dot under it, which is the open palm, instead of utun, that's the D sound. It's the udun. So here it's not uden or uten, it's uden, but it's really udun, to be heavy. A great udun, a weight, heavy-handed, and so forth. So you have, and we just show these variations to further make the point. It's spelled with two different dialects in ancient Kemet. The T sound, utun, to be heavy or weight. The same word with the D sound, udun, to be heavy or weight. And that, of course, passed into undu in Akan, meaning heavy, weighty. So you have Akan, undu, medicine, utun in ancient Kemet, medicine. Unduak, tree, plants, and Akan, utun, tree, plants in ancient Kemet. Duru, heavy or weight. Udunu or undun in ancient Kemet, heavy or weight. Duru means to descend, dismount a light, come down or go down, feel a presentiment or foreboding. This references the spiritual aspect of the medicine. The spirits come down and so forth, they descend, possess the individual, then the person becomes heavy with the spirit and so forth. Once you become heavy with the spirit, then unkom or communication can take place, clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, clairquilibrance and so forth, clairtimience. The spiritual aspect of the medicine making, Odwirafo, is called in African American parlance a conjurer, and the tradition often referred to as conjure. And so you see Duru meaning to descend, dismount a light, come or go down, to descend into, to strike of lightning, or prana, du, driam, esoja, the lightning strikes a tree, it catches fire, meaning lightning coming down and penetrating and so forth. The same thing happens with the, the spirits coming down and splitting the head and getting into the body and so forth, spirit possession. And then we talk about udi, which is also plural udiu and so forth, to lay, to put, place, set, to thrust out, to push, to throw, to shoot, cast out. Then you have undun, to breach a wall, to bore, to penetrate. You're talking about something coming down and penetrating, breaching a wall, splitting the individual. Then you have the very same term, it's not uden, but it's undun, to make an offering. An offering, a gift, a cake, or an offering. These are ritual offerings. You have the very same term in Kemet, uden, but it's really udun, because we know the vowel placement, because we have the same word in Akhan, means an altar. So the same word, undun, meaning medicine, it also means to become heavy with the spirit, to descend, the descent of a spirit. It also means to make an offering. It also is the term for an altar. Altar or a shrine. And then you have a related term, untu, table or altar for offerings and so forth, shrine. We talk about the circular orbit and so forth, and that has to do with the ring shot and so forth. But There's the Uduru, which has to do with the act of embalming, utilizing medicine to embalm the body and turn the body. The purpose of mummification in ancient Kemet was to turn the body, to harden the body and turn it into, make it crystallize. It becomes a great crystal, which is the greatest magnetic, force or entity that can draw the spirit of the person who used to live in that body back at certain ritual times to communicate with the community. So utilizing that medicine in a ritual fashion to harden the body, to crystallize the body, and once the body becomes a crystal, it's the greatest magnet for the ancestral spirit. That is the reason why we mummify the body. So, and we do the same thing in the Hoodoo tradition. And there's also the term undun, also meaning to write and to copy, talking about ritual, markings and so forth, that has to do with making ritual marks for divination. It says an ape god, the copyist of Tahuti and so forth, but to copy, to write. So that has to do with divination as well. And then you have the undunu, the specific divinities. So we show all that information. And one of the texts from ancient Kemet, Instruction of Ani, the Papyrus Bulak number 4, undunu neter ku sa tu erna betau tu. When making ritual offerings to the abosom, to the divinity, you are invoking God against offering that which he detests. But it says when offering, the term is undunu, which will be the Asante dialect, would be undu in Akan. When giving your undunu, when giving your hoodoo to the deities, guard against that which the deity detests. There's another piece that we translated. It says the divinity detests too much idle speaking in its shrine. Make your prayers, invocations with a heart which is loving or lawful, whose invocations are internal and not boastful. The divinity, the abosom, will attend to the work you are doing ritually, hear that which you have inquired about, and accept your offerings. When it says that the deity will accept your offerings, the deity will accept your unduru, will accept your hoodoo. So even hoodoo is used as a verb, just like it is in North America. It was used like that in ancient Kemet, and of course, in Akan tradition. So from ancient Khanate and Kemet through West Africa into North America, we're still using the same terms with the same meanings, cosmologically intact, multi-tiered meanings, multifaceted meanings, and so forth. And even ancient Khanate or Nubia uses the same term, the Undun land or Undunu land, a Sudani country and so forth. One of the titles of the ancient Nubia is the Undu land. That's south of Kemet, the Hoodoo land. So the Undu people, the Nubian people, went across after the invasions of Kemet by the Assyrians, then Persians, then Greeks, and then Romans, and then Arabs and so forth. Some of our people went further south. Some of our people came to West Africa, established the empire of Akana or Ghana, continued the tradition. When there were Muslim invasions, 1,000 years later, some of those people migrated further south to the regions of where Ghana and Ivory Coast are right now. And then hundreds of years after that, some of our people left that region and were forced into North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe during the Musuo Kessie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. And this is how people from ancient Khanate and Kemet, our ancestresses and ancestors, came to West Africa in the savanna regions, ended up into the forest, near the forest belt, and then ended up into the Western Hemisphere. But just as we were forced that way, we migrated first and then were forced to migrate, across the waters and so forth. The people ended up in the Western Hemisphere, but the culture and even the language and the ritual practices ended up in the Western Hemisphere, unbroken from thousands of years across continents. So we have the comparison of Akan and ancient Khanate Kemet, Undu meaning medicine, and both Undua, trees, Undu, trees, plants, Du meaning heavy, heaviness, Undunu meaning heavy, heaviness, Duru meaning to descend, come down, Udu meaning to cause to come down, magical formulae, Undu, ritual medicine offerings, Undunu and ancient Kemet, ritual medicine offerings, Aduru She, embalming, Udu She, there's a deity of embalming called Udu She in ancient Kemet, Aduru She or Undu She in Akan means embalming, Odwirafo, spirit conjurer, medicine, embalming, Udiu, embalmer, And just so you can see that, so when we say adurushe, meaning medicine, or the medicine that hardens the body and so forth, so the act of embalming a corpse, nduru she, to harden the body and so forth, mummification. And then the deity of embalming is Udu. The KH would be the Udu Chet. So that was in Akan, that's Udu She, not Utek, but Udu She, the divinity of embalming. So, and there are a number of different other related terms as well. But that simply, we're proving the term hoodoo is various multifaceted meanings, and so forth. And we even have the Adinkra symbol, Asase Yeduru, which means the earth Asase, earth mother, Ye, has Nduru, meaning possesses weight, it has substance, but it's also saying Asase, the earth mother, Ye, Duru, is hoodoo. The earth mother has substance, has power. Earth mother has that hoodoo, those ritual offerings, that plant life, of course, is born of the earth mother and so forth. Now, so that's the piece dealing with hoodoo. Now, at the term hoodoo, we want to deal with another important term. And we will pull this one up. And just so you are aware, so we have these various, we have the hoodoo courses where we go into detail about these things in a 2-hour course for each different term and function. But we want to go through all of them here quickly so we can get a better understanding. Now, the term Kankye in Akan, and this gives further definition. Sometimes people call the religion hoodoo, and it is a full religion with a full pantheon of divinities. And sometimes they call it conjure. But that term conjure is not the English term conjure, it's the Akan term Kankye. So when someone's speaking in a Southern dialect and they say Kankye, I practice Kankye, and you see these ethnographers in the early 1900s so-called writing the Negro dialect, and they'll say, well, the Negro said they practice Kankye, and they'll spell it C-O-N-J-E-H, Kankye. They'll say, well, this is the Negro dialect, but of course what they were trying to say is conjure. No, what we were saying was Kankye, and they got it right. So this is an image of an Akan man, woman sculpture and child and so forth. And of course you see the brother shaved face, but then the beard and so forth, just like you see in ancient Khanid and Kemet. If you think about it, look at the thousands and thousands of statues over the course of, thousands of years. You rarely see a man in Kemet with a mustache or facial hair. They will have the braided beard, or they're totally shaved like these two priests here. So the term Kankye in Akan means to utter incantations to bring down the spirits. It means to invoke or to call. This is a term we've been using for thousands of years, so we prove that. Kankye, to pray, rehearse, or speak a prayer, to invoke or call upon. They'll say the fetish, that means the deity. Kankye, that's the verb version, Kankye, and Kankye is prayer, invocation. Kankye is to pray, to invoke. Kankye is prayer, invocation. Kankye also to make a sign with straight or curved lines on a level surface, a mark or made by a stroke that has to do with when you're praying, engage in divination, making strokes and so forth in the earth or in the powder or dust and so forth. to mark off these signs or symbols for the divinity or the ancestral spirits coming forward. But the key is it's composed of two different words. And this takes it away from some English term. We're going to prove that it's an Akan term. It's not just some Akanized English term like Akan. People were trying to say conjure and they said Kankye and they Akanized an English word. Will show that this has always been an Akan word, but it also goes back to ancient Kemet. It's two terms, Ka, which is nasal, and you see the symbol over the top of the A, so it's not Ka, but it's Ka, nasal, Ka, meaning to emit a sound, and then Che is the second word. In the Akan dictionary, you see Ka in the Akan language to emit a sound, to utter, speak, say, or tell. For example, the cat emits a sound from its throat, Ka, to emit a sound, to utter, speak, say, or tell. That's in the Akan language. Now we go to a hieroglyphic dictionary, and Kai, as well as Ka, to think out, to devise, meditate, to speak, repeat, to say, cry out, call out, tell out. So Ka meaning to utter, speak, say, or tell in Akan, thousands of years before that. Ka, as well as Kai. This version is Kai with the two strokes, but this version is the K sound with the bird, the eagle, which is the ah sound, and that's Ka. And we know it's pronounced Ka because we have the proper vocalization. It's not ku, it's not ki, it's not ko, it's or ka, it's ka, because we still use the term to speak, to cry out, to call out, to tell out, and so forth. Then you also have ka, to surrender oneself to a fetish, meaning a deity or a patron spirit. Okay, I'm gonna make sure. Okay, somebody's saying it's on the wrong screen. So right now, can you see the term Ka? So let me know if it's back up. So can you see Ka on the screen now? Okay, good. Okay. So we're saying in the Akan language, Kankye to pray, rehearse, speak a prayer, invoke a call, and Kankye to prayer invocation. Also to make a sign, straight or curved lines, and so forth. We said it's the combination of the term Ka to emit a sound, to utter, speak, say, or tell. That's in Akan. In a hieroglyphic dictionary, to speak, to say, to cry out, to call out, to tell out, to sing, and so forth. Same term. Ka also means to just surrender oneself to the spirit in the Akan language. So then in ancient Kemet, you have the term Ka associated with the Ba spirit, but the term Ka is the term for soul. But it also means to speak, say, or tell out. You also have the Hem Ka, the minister of the Ka, the priest of the Ka in ancient Kemet, the one who surrenders to the divinity. Now, the second part of Kankye in Akan, you have Ka, but then Che, to become clear, visible, to appear, come to light, to come bring forth, to obtain or impart subsistence. This is only used in connection with Ade Che, the day breaks, things become visible. So Che means to come forward, to become clear, visible, as in the coming forward of the sun. And then you have Ache, a salutation, greeting. When you say good morning in Akan, you say Ma Che or Mema Wa Che. I give you Ache, meaning I give you dawning. I give you clearing, a coming forth, as in the coming forward of the sun. That's what Ache means. That's the second part of Kankye. Then you have Che in ancient Kemet, to rise like the sun, or like a king on his throne, to ascend, to shine, appear. And what you see is this symbol here is the sun just peeking above the horizon and the rays shooting out. The sun is not hovering above the horizon yet, it's just emerging, it's coming forward, becoming visible, and the rays are shooting out. We know what the proper vocalization is. It's not cha or chi or ka or kai, it's che, to come forth, to rise like the sun. The same as ache in Akan, to salute, to greet, but che meaning to become clear, visible. The day breaks, things become visible in connection with the sunrise. And again, we show that that's the sun rising above the horizon. So ka means to speak, utter incantations, and che, to come forth, to come forward, to make visible. When the sun rises above the horizon, what's happening actually is the unseen power that was in the underworld manifests in the physical world. And not only do you receive illumination, but you also become empowered and vitalized. When we engage in ritual invocation, ritual incantation, ritual prayer, ritual chant, ritual song, and so forth, we bring forward the deities, we make them come forward. We speak, ka, say, ka, tell, utter incantations, ka, and then che, the spirits that were in the spirit realm or underworld and so forth, come forward, as in the coming forward of the sun, and they bring their power through spirit possession and manifest in the community, get in the body of the person and communicate and touch people and heal and so forth. They bring illumination, but they also bring empowerment. So that's why ka and che, Kankye means to utter incantations to bring forth the spirits. It has the exact same meaning. Those two terms have the exact same meaning in ancient Kemet as they have in Akhan. That combined word is Kankye, to utter incantations to bring forth the spirits. And we continue to call what we were doing Kankye or Kanje in North America, to invoke the divinities through ritual incantation. It has nothing to do with the English word conjure. The Proto-Indo-European language family, which is the root of the various European languages and so forth, does not precede ancient Canadian Kemet. So these terms come from our people, and they were continuously used. So from ancient Canadian Kemet, Nubian Egypt, through West Africa into North America, we still said Kankye, meaning the same. We say the same word, and we have the same multi-tiered and cosmological meanings. The same with Undu. Now, we're going to switch to one more, and then we're going to see if we can connect with Afia. There's one more piece. Now, you're familiar with the term haint. Many people are familiar with the term haint, a haint spirit in the Hoodoo tradition and so forth. And, you know, they'll say it's a spirit that's, you know, aggressive. People get scared of haint spirits, and they'll use haint blue, use color haint blue to paint their house or their room, haint blue to keep those negative spirits away. But it's a, you know, an aggressive kind of spirit. Of course, once again, the white snarl springer try to say it comes from a European term and all kinds of nonsense, or haunt or saint or all kinds of nonsense. The term haint, term in Hoodoo, comes from the Akan term hinti. And we have, it's a very interesting, you know, the way we can show that not only linguistically, but also cross-culturally. So the term haint that we continue to use, Akan term hinti. First, we show a couple of comparisons. The term hinta in Akan, in another dialect, is also written hintao with a W at the end, but hinta equals hintao. Hintao means to hide, to conceal, to be hid or concealed. And then hintawe means a hiding place, covert. So that's interesting on one hand, because, you know, that's part of the nature when they talk about a haint spirit. You go into a house and the haint is coming after you and so forth, and people get scared because there's a spirit that they don't know where it is at first, and then it manifests hidden, concealed, and so forth. So hinta is part of that process. Now, but then you also have the term, just like hinta becomes hintao with a W at the end, same term, different dialects. You have the term hinti, which is also written hintiu with a W at the end, but it's the same word. The key is hinti It's also written Hintin, to excite, rouse, stir up. My heart is stirred up, my anger has been aroused or excited. That is a descriptive of the nature of these spirits that are aroused through ritual invocation. The Hinti spirits are the ones that are aroused, excited, awakened, and so forth for ritual purposes. So we've always used that term to define that. But here's the key. We talked about the Asante dialect of Akan and the Akwamu dialect of Akan. And for example, Undu in one dialect, Unduru in another dialect. Well, we also have that at play here. If you look at Hinta, Hintao, in another dialect, for Asante dialect, the H instead of Hinta, the Ha sound, is Huinta, Huinta. There's a little soft W along with it. So instead of Hinta, or Hintao, as you can see here, Hinta equals Hintao. But Hintao in another dialect is Huinta. Instead of Hinta is Huinta, same word. Another example is Hintiu. In this dialect is spelled with an HW, Huinti. So if Hintiu with the W, we go back up. Hintiu with the W is the same as Hinti, which is Hintin. That's the term Haint in the Akwamu dialect, Hinti. But if Hintiu with the W is the same as Hinti, in the different dialect, it's Huinti. So some Akan people call these spirits Hintin, the ones who are aroused and awakened and so forth. But some Akan people pronounce it Huinti, HW, same meaning aroused, awakened, fired up spirits through ritual invocation and all of that. The reason why that's important, and it has to do with cross-cultural proof, is because the Akan people in North America, who are speaking Akwamu dialect and so forth, many of them, even though there were Asante people and Fanti and otherwise, but the Akwamu dialect was dominant in North America, we said the Hinti spirits, later pronounced Haint by Europeans, but the spirits that are aroused and so forth, the Hinti spirits. The Akan people in South America, however, they call them the Winti spirits or the Huinti spirits. Akan people in South America, in Suriname, they still practice Akan Ancestral Religion. They call Akan Ancestral Religion in Suriname, they call it Huinti. They usually spell it W-I-N-T-I, Huinti. That's the word for deities in South America. They call the spirits by their descriptive title, the Winties, or Winti. Instead of saying that's an Orisha, that's a Vodou, they say that's a Winti. That comes from the Akan term Huinti, the spirits that are aroused or awakened through ritual invocation. When you invoke them, then they show up. It's the same as Kankye. You speak, utter incantations, and the spirits come forward, they become visible, they alight and so forth, they illuminate and they empower. So in South America, they say Huinti. In North America, we said Hinti, but we're talking about the same thing. Now, why is that important? Because these crackers will say Huinti just means the windy spirits. That's what they tell people. So we're going to pull this up. Okay. And let me make, can you see the article you should see? It should say an African-American religion called Winti. Okay, so everybody sees, you see, does it say Winti? All right. This article was written by a traditional Winti practitioner in South America, in Suriname. They use the term African-American because they're quote unquote African-American. They're South, you know, that's South America. So they call themselves Afro-American and African-American, just like in North America, we call ourselves African-American and so forth, Afro-American, they use the same term. So when they're talking about African-American, he's talking about himself as somebody living in South America. Akan people were enslaved. They became maroons. Sometimes they call them the Saramakas and so forth. They broke free from enslavement in the early or mid 1700s in Suriname and set up independent maroon villages. They still speak Akan language. They still practice Akan Ancestral Religion. They still have the 7 days of the week. They still call themselves Kwesi and Akosua and Kojo and Ajua and everything else. They still call on the spirits of the divinities of the 7 days of the week and so forth, just like our people do here in North America and in Ghana and so forth. They still use the term Kra for soul, divine consciousness that is used in the Akan tradition. They still practice Akan Ancestral Religion. Some of them also include some Vodou as well, but the Winti tradition is the Akan tradition. So he says here, with the arrival of Africans in the so-called New World, they also brought with them highly developed belief systems and philosophies and so forth. And then he talks about in Suriname called Winti. The majority of Africans shipped to Suriname between 1650 and 1800 came from the Akan Fanti speaking regions. The Fanti is the second largest Akan group. Asante is the first largest. Akwamu, we're a little bit, smaller. But they call the, tradition Winti. Now, there's a couple of things we just want to show. So for example, here, they'll talk about the power of Anana, which they will call the creative power. And they also call the power Nana, Anana Quadriampong. That is actually in Akan language, that is Nana Tredriampong. That's a title of a divinity, Tredriampong. In Suriname, they say Quadriampong, but they're using the same term. They just spell it a little bit differently and speak it a little bit differently, but they're still calling on, they say Anana Quadriampong. And in Ghana today, they'll say Nana Tredriampong. In Suriname, they'll say Asie for earth. In Akan and Ghana, they'll say Asase for the earth mother. They say Asaye or Asie. In Suriname, they have the same variations of names of the divinities, and there are a number of different divinities. They say Adumankama. In Suriname and South America, that is from Odomankuma amongst the Akan people in Ghana and Ivory Coast and so forth. So the same deities, same names, same functions and so forth. But instead of using the regular term Abosom for deities, they also call them the roused up spirits. That's a descriptive title. They call them the Winties. As we show, that's the term Winti. Who are the Winties? He gives a little breakdown. The Gorong Winti, the spiritual perception experience is engendered by the manifestation of the earth. The Busi Winti, the Watra Winti, the Tapu Winti. What that's saying is the Gorong Winti is the ground Winti, the Wintis are the spirits of the earth, the deities of the earth. The Busi Winti, connected to the manifestation of vegetative life, that's the bush Winti. The Watra Winti is the water Winti, the water spirits. The Tapu Winti are the spirits in the atmosphere, solar and wind and so forth, magnetosphere and so forth. So the ground, bush, water, and sky. Different variations, different aspects of creation. But each class of Wintis are spirits. So they call them the Wintis. There's an entire, religious structure that they maintained. Here they talk about Anana, Kejamai, Kejiampong, and that's, of course, as we said in Akan, Nana, Tridriampong. So they've maintained the names of the divinities and so forth. So that's South America, and they have an entire pantheon of divinities and so forth. This individual, as well as some other people in Suriname, even reached out to us because they saw the work that we have been publishing on the Hoodoo tradition and the Akan tradition and so forth, and it informed their work. They were able to ask us about specific divinities. I remember one sister in particular, she was trying to figure out a name of a divinity that she grew up learning about in Suriname. She was in the Netherlands, Suriname was a colony of the Dutch and so forth. So there are a lot of people from Suriname who live in the Netherlands and so forth. But she was trying to remember the name of divinity that she would see in ritual and so forth when she was young in Suriname. And she described the divinity. And I said, oh, that's the divinity Yao. And she was like, exactly. And he would be the one who pointed to the sun and shot the arrow at the sun, and he would be fiery and possessed. That's Yao and Akhan. That's, Yao, Heru, Yao, and ancient Kemet. And that somebody born on a Thursday who carries that energy, that's Heru and so forth. Son of Asar and Aset, also called Yao in ancient Kemet. He's called Yao and Akhan. He's still called Yao in North America. Any male born on Yao Da Thursday is named Yao and so forth and carries his energy into the world. But they still call him and invoke him as Yao in South America. And we were able to give them information that, confirmed what they've been doing. They were surprised to see that people in North America were still practicing the same tradition, invoking the same deities by the same names that we preserved in our blood circles, in our names and so forth, as they have done in South America and so forth. So that's just an example of, we use, in North America, we say Hinti as a descriptive title of the Abo song. They say Winti, Huinti, two different Akan dialects preserved for hundreds of years in the West after we were brought, from the East and so forth. So we're going to take a little break right here. I want to go to a different piece. We're going to do something true historical. Now, we just mentioned the day names, so-called day names in our Akan tradition. This is another key piece. So you're born on a certain day of the week. In our Akan tradition, you have a specific name. I was born on a Wusida, which is Sunday. My Kradin or soul's name is Kwesi. That means I'm a child of the divinity Awusi. If you're born on Benada, which is Tuesday, if you're a male, you're Kwa Bena, meaning you're a servant Kwa of the divinity Bena, but then the female divinity is Abena. So women who are born on Tuesday, Abenada, are called Abena as well. So if you hear somebody named Kwa Bena or Abena, they're named after the divinity. Their soul, the divinity in the head region, has that name. It's the soul name, not just the day name, but the soul name and so forth. We have this article here talking about quote unquote Carolina slave names. It says throughout the colonial period, as many as 15 to 20% of the slaves in the two Carolinas had African names. A wide variety of names like Kwamino, which is Kwamena, which is Makan Pradin for a male born on Saturday, Muso, Kush, Fukbia, TB, and so forth, appear occasionally on early slave lists, but none of these survived for long. The most prevalent sources of African nomenclature were day names, a set of 14 names, 7 male and 7 female, used in the tribal custom of naming a child for the day of the week on which he or she was born. And it says that function has been compared to that of the astrological signs in our society, that is, as a means of classifying one's personality or endowing one with certain powers and characteristics. The most popular of these among male slaves were Quash. Quash in Carolina, just like in Jamaica, Kwashi is where you get Kwasi or Kwesi. So Quash or Kwesi and so forth, and Kwesi is a nickname for Kwesi and so forth. So that's why I said Quash meaning Sunday, Kujo meaning Monday, which is Kwajo or Kojo, male being born on Monday, Kufi or Kufi, which is really Kofi for Friday, Kwaku for Wednesday. And let me make sure if everybody is seeing this Carolina slave names article, that's what you should see on the screen. Kwaku for Wednesday. The female counterparts, he said, used with somewhat less frequency, though Juba, which is Monday, which is Ajoba or Ajowa for Monday, sometimes pronounced Ajoba or Juba. 1 second. Okay. And then Kwasheba, which is, it's not Kwashiba, it's Akwesi Ba or Kwashi Ba. That's a feminine version of Akosuya or Kosua, also Kosiba and so forth. That is a feminine version of a woman born on Sunday. Kubena, Kwabena, he got that one wrong because Kubena is actually Tuesday. Aba, which is a female born on Yauda, Thursday, or Abada, and so forth. So they're talking about here the Akan soul naming or day naming system. I'll show you a chart real quick. And these are the Akradin bosom. The deities animating the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. And we have a chart, and you should be able to see this chart. If you don't see the chart on the screen, let me know. But the day of the week, the divinity, the female Akradin, and the praise name, the male Akradin, and the praise name. So Kwesi Da or Wusi Da, which is Sunday, the Abosom, Awusi and Ese, the male and female deities governing Sunday. The female names are Kosua, Okosia, Akwasiba, Akwesiba, Akwesiwa, Esi, Kisi, different soul names for women. Praise name, Bodria, which is an animal's tail, a whisk dealing with sovereignty, Adampo, different names. Then you have Kwesi, Kwasi, Akwesi, Si, for male born on Awusida, Ogwe, Quine, opener of the path, Bodria, animal's tail, whisk, sovereign, born leader, and so forth. And then you have the various names for Ajawa, Monday born, Akotowa, conciliatory, introverted, intuitive, and so forth. Kwajo or Kojo, he's also a Koto. Adai, praise names. You have Kwabena, Abena, Kweku, Akua, Yao, Ya, and Abba for Thursday. Afi and Afi, which is Kofi and Afua or Efu or Efia, praise names Efi or Efe. And then you have Kwame or Kwamena and Ama, the contraction of Amemeniwa, Saturday born female, Kwame, Saturday born male, and the praise names and so forth. So we have those titles, but then we also have the specific deities that govern them. Awusi and Esi on Sunday, Ajo and Ajwa on Monday, Bena and Abena on Tuesday, Awuku and Akua, Yao Ya and Abba, Afi, Amen, Men. We show their correspondences in the Vodun tradition, the Orisha tradition, and the tradition of ancient Khanid and Kemet, showing these are the same deities with the same functions in creation. We also show these divinities are connected not only to the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies. These 11 divinities are governing the 11 major body systems: endocrine, reproductive, immune, lymphatic, renal, nervous, cardiovascular, digestive, respiratory, exocrine, skeletal. So they govern the 11 major body systems within your body. Those are shrines for those divinities. Your endocrine system is a shrine for Awusi. Your reproductive system is a shrine for Ajwa Aset. Your immune system is a shrine for the divinity Bena, who's called Ogun in Yoruba. He's called Bena in Akan. He's Ogu in Vodun. He's Ikenga, for example, in Igbo. But he's Heru Bekudet in ancient Kemet. He's Bena in Akan. The lymphatic system, that law enforcement structure in the body, is governed by Abena, who is also called Sekhmet in ancient Kemet. She's called Sechima in Akan, Sechimet in ancient Kemet, and so forth. So all the 11 major body systems are shrines for these divinities, but they also govern the great divine body of the Supreme Being and execute the same function within the great divine body of the universe as well. There's an immune system within the universe. There's an, lymphatic system. There's a endocrine system. There's a structural skeletal system, and so forth. All of these systems are within the great divine body of creation, the body of Amen and Amen. And on a microcosmic level, we have these shrines within our bodies. And these are centers of resonance for us to communicate with these forces in nature. And of course, they have their shrines on Earth, within the oceans, rivers, magnetosphere, atmosphere, lower mantle, upper mantle, those kinds of things. So this is part of our culture, but the key is when you see somebody with a day name like Kwesi or Ajua, that means that Kwa Asi, the servant Kwa of Asi, the divinity Asi, that means I was born into the world with the divinity Asia Awusi, who is Alsara, governing my head, governing my crop. That means I invoke that divinity to align myself, my thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. If someone was born on Monday, Joda Monday, and they're called Ajua, they're a child of Nana Ajua, the Abosom Ajua, who's called Aset in ancient Kemet, and Udua in Yoruba, and Minona in Vodun, and Ide Mili in Igbo. She's governed by that divinity. That means the divinity that governs her spiritual head is Nana Ajua. And she invokes that divinity on her soul day, her Krada on Mondays. She's, cleanses her head, invokes that divinity, and gets direction from that divinity to how to bring that energy into the communal sphere. We need fiery energy within the communal sphere. We need lunar energy within the communal sphere. We need that martial energy in the communal sphere, just like we need the function of the endocrine system, the function of the reproductive system, the function of the immune system, the function of the lymphatic system, the function of the renal system. We need all those kinds of functions in the communal sphere. We need a immune and lymphatic energy within the community. Those people become the law enforcement type individuals, the military individuals, the ones who protect, defend the community. We need the skeletal energy within the community. Those people become engineers, structural engineers, and so forth, mechanical engineers, those kinds of things. We need people who govern the renal system within the communal body. They become healers, healeresses, and so forth. The renal system, the kidneys and the bladder, and so forth, maintain fluid balance in the body and mineral balance in the body. Somebody needs to maintain balance, mineral balance, quote unquote, and fluid balance within the communal body. That means when there's illnesses and so forth, plant life, animal life, mineral life is utilized in some combination to remedy and bring balance to imbalanced situations. So we need somebody in the cardiovascular communal sphere that has to do with the administration of justice, the establishment of a system of sound governance and jurisprudence and so forth, governed by Yao, Heru, and so forth. So we need all of those functions, not only in the physical body, but also within the communal body. So when you're born under the auspices of a specific divinity, you carry their energy into the world. You're a vessel for that kind of energy to come into the communal sphere. So when we have a Krade, it's not just, oh, he was born on Monday, he's Kojo. No, that means he's in alignment with it. He was born into the world with the divinity attached to his spiritual head. That's part of the religion. So when you read an article like the other one talking about the Carolina slave names, and they say, oh, these people had day names, it has something to do with their character, and that comes from the Akan people, so we can see that these people were Akan. But what it really means is they are engaged in ritual practices to invoke those specific divinities that govern their head. And then when there are certain animal totems that people are connected to and utilize, that means matriclan and patriclan totems are incorporated because certain divinities govern those animal totems, and those are messengers for those divinities, as well as those clans. That's part of the ancestral religion. When people see somebody named Kojo or Kweku or Ajua or Esi and so forth, they don't associate those names with being representative of hoodoo. They just think they're names, and maybe there was an Akan retention, but they don't know the name is directly connected to a deity, connected to a ritual practice that's done every week on a certain day and throughout the course of the year, and certain forms of divination, certain forms of ritual song, ritual dance that accompany that, ritual colors and everything else. So just that notion of day names opens up an entire realm of a ritual practice that's specifically Akan. So that's an example of Akan culture being hidden in plain sight that people wouldn't associate with hoodoo because they didn't know it was part of the tradition. So they'll be writing books and articles and having, certifications on, hoodoo and so forth, and never understood where the tradition comes from. So. Okay. Okay, we're going to go back to the piece we started with in the beginning. And these are just a few of the terms, you know, we go through, as I said, the terms that we list here, Undu and Kankye and Hintin and Moja and Japati and all of that. In our Hoodoo courses, we have, you know, Hoodoo parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 of them are 4-week courses. 2 of them are 6-week courses. And we go into this and other information in detail, you know, 6-week course, each, you know, class session is 2.5 hours. And we go into a much more detail about each one of these specific concepts to, you know, give even more information. But we wanted to summarize much of it here, you know, summarize as much as we could here. So this root called High John the Conqueror, or John the Conqueror, or Johnny Kakaduru, and so forth, key component of the healing and ritual aspect of Hoodoo. And Hoodoo is a religion. We wrote the book Rekit Hena Speret. And let me just show you that book real quick. Because sometimes we you know, use, we get into some sloganeering, which is easily understandable because people make certain statements and it sounds deep, and, you know, we repeat things. But our book, Rekit Hena Speret, the Etymology and Cosmology of Religion and Spirit, we show that the term religion or religio comes directly from Rekit, and Speret, or spirit, comes from the ancient Kaniti term and Kamiti term Speret. So religion and spirit, or Rekit Hena Speret, are identical. It is fake religion that's incongruous with spirituality, but real religion and spirituality are identical. So this notion of I'm not into religion, I'm not religious, I'm into spirituality, that makes no sense when we understand the actual etymological and cosmological roots of the terms Rekit and Speret. So that's why we utilize that terminology. Now, to go back to, and that book is a free download as well. As I mentioned before, all 31 of the books I've published to date, and we have more books coming out, but all the 31 books I've published to date are free downloads from the website. And when you hear typically use the term, we published this book or we put this out, is because it will be inaccurate to say, I just came up with this idea and I decided to write a book and I wrote it. I get information or direction, guidance from the Nsamanfo ancestresses and ancestors, then I follow that guidance and follow up on it and verify it tangibly, physically, through, you know, writing, through artifacts, through whatever it is, and, you know, put the work together. But very often that direction comes directly, what book needs to be written at a specific time. There's sometimes I want to put something out, but then there are other times when the Nsamanfo wants certain things put out at certain times. So it's not an individual effort, it's always a corporate or communal effort in that regard. So when I'm talking about we published the books, I wrote the books, but yes, I can't take credit for just coming up with ideas. So this is why sometimes people ask us, why do you say we instead of I? And you don't want to have someone constantly saying, I did this, I did that, I, then it's really kind of crazy. Then you start seeing people are kind of delusional if they think they've done everything on their own. So, but Hoodoo is a religion, full pantheon of deities, ritual practices, language, and so forth. Now, we talked about these different classes of, you know, healers, ritualists, healeresses, and so forth. Now, and you should be saying this article, if you don't see this High John the Conqueror article that we're looking at right now within our HOODOO MAYN journal, let me know in the chat room and then we can reboot. Most publications addressing the identity of High John the Conqueror and the related root describe him as an African prince, king or royal who was forced into enslavement. He had an irrepressible spirit and fought back against the slave master. Some state that he led a revolt, while others state that he outwitted the slave master and could not be broken. It is also stated that just prior to his death, he told his community that his spirit would be contained in a specific plant or root. All we had to do was evoke his community or him ritually through his root, and he would assist us to overcome our obstacles, physical and spiritual. So we quoted from Wikipedia, you know, the common things that people say, folk hero and things like that. Some people think that he was just made up. You have some quote unquote African-American writers who will say that he was just representative of, you know, our struggles and so forth, that we came up with a character or a hero and so forth. Or some people say, well, maybe he came from, you know, Mexico, or maybe he was a Congo prince. They always go back to the Congo because that's what they're familiar with. It was more popular to talk about the Congo or the Yoruba or Vodun, because those are the things that people are familiar with. They didn't think to look to the Akan people. So there are over 22 million Akan people in West Africa, one of the largest ethnic groups on the continent, and one of the largest from which, you know, we were taken and forced into North America. But since people are not focused on them, they just assume that, well, it must have come from the Congo. And once the Dogon became popular, people started talking about the Dogon people. So you'll see Brer Rabbit, Uncle Remus stories. Zora Neale Hurston talks about High John the Conqueror in her collection of folklore and so forth. So a number of different stories. And then, of course, when crackers get a hold to it, they start talking about the devil and all kinds of nonsense. You know what they're going to do. So Zora Neale Hurston reports that, like King Arthur of England, he has served his people. And like King Arthur, he is not dead. He waits to return when his people shall call him again. He went back to Africa, but he left his power here. And he placed his American dwelling in the root of a certain plant. Only possess that root, and he can be summoned at any time. So that's some of the information there. Hold on a second. Okay. Now, here's the key. So some people think he was an African prince and all of that. And then some people think that he, you know, was a mythical figure that summed up all of our, you know, desires and so forth. But they don't know, even if the ones who say he was an African prince, they either say, you know, he was like Gaspar Yenga, who came from Mexico, or, you know, some Congo prince, or somebody from Benin and so forth. They don't know. We know who he is. He was a real individual. Hold on a second. Now, once again, we are publishing this article. We did a broadcast on it, but publishing the article. We're the first to prove exactly who he is and what the root is, the name of the root, and so forth. Quote unquote, High John the Conqueror was an Akwamu Asafo Hini, which means that Hini, or king or chief of the Asafo, of the warriors and warrioresses, but the warriors in this context, he was a lieutenant of the Akwamu Hini, of the Akwamu king. Okay, I'm just trying to let a couple of people in. They were trying to get into the chat. Okay. Now, we've been able to locate and show exactly who he is. So for the past 100+ years, people have been coming up with different theories. We're going to show in this article and prove that. In 1733, the slave insurrection on St. John, the Danish West Indies island called St. John, there was a quote unquote insurrection November 23rd, 1733, when 150 African quote unquote slaves enslaved from Akwamu, these are Akwamu Akan people, revolted against the slave owners, managers of the island's plantations. It lasted for several months. It started in November all the way through August. They took over the entire island for a number of months. The Akwamu people at that time, the Akwamu general and you know, the soldiers, they were going to make this the western outpost of the Akwamu empire. They didn't just free themselves from enslavement. They took over the island and they were about to run it like the western post of their empire. That's how they were moving. Planners regained control at the end of May. Some of the soldiers were defeated. There was internal strife. There were some groups who were not Akan, not Akwamu, who didn't want to be ruled by the Akwamu. And sometimes there's, you know, so they didn't join with them to fight against the whites. You know, they were like, If the whites are no longer in charge, then these Akwamu are going to be in charge. I don't want to be up under them. And some of the Akwamu got forced, into North America during enslavement, because when the Akwamu Empire became large, some of them ruled, justly, but some of them ruled their vassal states harshly, which created bad blood. And so then when there's internal fighting, then, there's a split within the nation. If the Akwamu is, beating or controlling one particular vassal state, they'll join on with the European and fight with the European against the Akwamu. The same thing happened with the Asante Empire. They were the largest empire at the time that they were annexed by the British in 1902, but they had a number of wars, the Anglo-Asante Wars, and every war the Asante people were winning. They were destroying the British coalition, war after war after war after war. But at some point, the Asante fell into a civil war because of a succession dispute, and the nation was split. And that rending caused, inner conflict, and they were fighting against each other. And then one side allied with the British, to fight, and, it fell apart that way. But if they were united, the British were inferior. They could not defeat the Asante. Similar things happened with the Akwamu. So the revolt fell apart, but they were running it for over 6 months, the entire island of St. John. Now, the Akwamu Hini, the Akwamu king at the time, was Ansa Kwao, and his lieutenant, he had a lieutenant. His lieutenant's name was Nyamma, also pronounced Nyamma or Jama. They got caught. His lieutenant got caught with a number of his followers, captured during that war. They were at war with the Achim, which was a rival Akhan group. And when they were at war, some of them became prisoners of war. When they became prisoners of war, the Achim sold them to the Danes, and they ended up in the Western Hemisphere. In May of 12,733, or so-called 1733, the vessel called the Larberg Galley arrived on the island of St. Thomas in the Danish Caribbean. The records indicated that there were 242 captives who survived the journey out of an initial 443, including 124 men, 64 women, 26 boys, 28 girls. And their names are on the logs from the castle, or the quote-unquote dungeon on the coast of Afuraka, the number of people, how many women, how many men, how many girls, how many boys, what their names were, what their positions were in society. And then months later, when they get to the quote-unquote Danish Caribbean, the logs still exist there. The number of women, the number of men, the number of boys, the number of girls, what their names were, what their positions were, and also the fact that nearly 200 plus had died. So there are records from both sides. Amongst the captives was a royal court official. Royal court official and top lieutenant of the Akwamu Hini, the Akwamu king, Ansa Kwao. This royal leader, as we said, in the armed forces during the Akwamu War. His name was Nyamma, which is also pronounced Njama or Jama. Asafo Hini, Asafo is warrior, Hini is king or chief or head. He's listed and described in the Christian War castle records in Ghana from where he was sold. He is also listed in the Danish records in the Caribbean. He was sold to the Soapman plantation on St. John. Asafo Hini, Jama, was recognized by his compatriots as a ruler, even in their captivity. So he rose to a leadership position on the plantation. He became a foreman. The whites had realized that he had an untamable spirit and fear, provoking this decorated military officer. They therefore gave him a leadership position in an attempt to distract his focus. When they saw somebody who was a leader and they couldn't suppress them, they were like, okay, we'll give you a leadership position. Maybe that'll simmer things down, make you less likely to want to totally revolt. They gave him a leadership position because the people saw him as a leader. And some whites thought that if they showed some of the people who they saw, the others seeing as, having respect for this as a leader, if they said, well, you were a military officer and you were caught as a prisoner of war, but I'm going to respect you as a military officer, even though you're in captivity, some people will be foolish enough to say, oh, they actually kind of respect our people. They're not treating us as harshly. Maybe we shouldn't revolt. So that's what they would do sometimes. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it did. But they made him a foreman. They gave him a leadership position. He was referred to as King Jama, which is King Nyamma. In the Danish records, they will say the natives called him King Jama. That's Asafo Hinni Jama, translated in English to King Jama. He was a royal court official and a top lieutenant. He had that respect. They'll say the natives called him King Jama, but the Danish called him Konge Joni. In English, very often the writers will write it as King June or King John. But if you go on Wikipedia, for example, and type in Joni or on a language site and listen to the recording of the way the Danish would pronounce it, they won't say June or Juni, they say Joni. So they call him Konge Joni or King Joni. So in English, they would write it King June or King John or King Johnny. But they, in their record, said, well, the natives call him King Jama, we call him Konge Joni. That's King or His Highness Joni, according to them. But for us, it was Asafo Hinni Jama or King Jama. But they mispronounce his name, Joni. And you know, crackers do that all the time. If you know who Jesse Owens is, his name is, James Cleveland Owens. And he said his name was J.C. Owens because that's, that was his nickname, J.C., James Cleveland Owens. When the Europeans asked him what his name was, he said J.C. They were like, oh, Jesse? He's like, no, J.C. And they just started calling him Jesse because it sounded more like Jesse to them. So they just decided they're going to call him Jesse Owens instead of J.C. Owens, just because they felt like doing that. And just like they corrupt the names Al-Sar and Al-Set and Heru to Osiris, Isis, and Horus and so forth and keep saying it, even though they know the actual names is Al-Sar, Al-Set, and Heru, they're going to continue to force the fake names as, just a colonizer mindset, always trying to control even information. So they call him Konge Joni or King John or Johnny and so forth. We call him Jama and so forth. So this is where you get His Highness John or High John the Conqueror. He led the revolt that took over the entire island. Now, this was the most expansive revolt of Afro-Kainu Africans in the Western Hemisphere in trustery and history at that time. That Akwamu-led revolt resulted in our people taking over the entire island. That was before Haiti. That was a number of years before Haiti. Like less than 70 years before Haiti. So up until that point, that had not happened yet. So the White Nile Spring was shook. They were used to bringing our people over here, enslaving our people, putting them in chains and so forth. Sometimes people would escape, go into maroon areas. They would never be able to catch them again. But at this point, this military leader, who the natives called King Jama, he was a royal ruler. He organized a revolt that overthrew and took over the entire island. And they were going to run it, as we said, as the Western outpost of the Akwamu Empire. They were like, okay, we're international now. They weren't just thinking about going back to the continent. They were like, we're about to rule this over here as well. We're going to overthrow the Europeans in the West and take over everything. That was their aim. Now, it's customary for Akwamu and other Akan warriors to never allow themselves to be captured. They would opt to commit suicide before they would allow the cracker to just capture them, especially in war like that. So this is what happened. A number of them committed suicide, but Nyamma informed his people if they ever needed his guidance, they could invoke his spirit through the use of a particular root. And the ritual invocation will garner spiritual healing, protection, and so forth. Now, we have master clan divinities, we have patriclan divinities that govern our master clan and patriclan lines. We have animal totems associated with the clan. So if you're born in the Bretuo clan, like Afia is, the Osebo, the leopard, is the master clan animal totem, the Achinebois. I'm from the Asona Abusia, the Asona clan. A major animal totem, or Achinebois, is the crow or the raven. The Asachiri clan is the major, animal totem is Opete, is the vulture and so forth. So Depending on what clan you're from, there are animal totems, but there are also plant totems and mineral totems. In the Patrick clans, as well as the Matric clans, that's throughout Akan culture and across the board in Afro-Akan. Plant totems are associated with deities as well. Just like animal totems are associated with deities. In ancient Kemet, the falcon associated with Heru and so forth, the cow associated with Het Heru. These are major animal totems, but also plant totems associated with deities because they carry the energy of a divinity. Fiery plants carry the energy of a fiery divinity. Cool plants and so forth, watery plants connected to water divinities. When Nyamma stated that his spirit resided in a particular plant, he was speaking of his plant totem. That plant totem is Nyamma. So you have a king, a warrior, overthrew untamable spirit, overthrew the cracker, was running the island with his people for a number of years. When they caught him, he committed suicide. They said, hey, if you want to contact me and tune into this warrior type spirit to overthrow our enemies, do it through this particular root, the plant. My name is Nyamma or Jama, and the plant is Nyamma or Jama. That is the plant totem. It's also called a Tokotaka and so forth. We go into some more linguistic details for that. But it's also referred to, when it says Otokotaka, synonym Otofo Tafa, when we look at Otofa, one who has fallen in battle, been killed by an accident, but one who has fallen in battle. That particular plant, the Nyamma plant, is also named Otofo Tafa. The Otofo spirit is the one that has fallen in battle. That plant carries the energy of one who's fallen in battle. What do Akan people say about somebody who's fallen in battle? They're talking about Osaman, Osamanfo, and so forth, the ancestral spirits. He's repeating what the Akan people were telling him, and he's writing this dictionary. He said, there are, according to the belief of the heathen Negroes, 3 different kinds of departed spirits. Those who fell in battle or by an accident, for those who fell in battle, that's A. B, common spirits. C, lingering spirits. The last name are not admitted to the world of the spirits. Lingering spirits, earthbound spirits who can't get accepted into the ancestral realm, hanging around the houses that they were murdered in or where they died at the hospital and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's the 3rd kind of spirit. That last kind of spirit, they're not allowed into the, ancestral realm, because typically they're disordered and so forth. Where the others are, but hover about behind the dwellings. The spirit of those who were killed do not associate with the common spirits. They walk about rubbed with white clay and in white garments. They are not afraid, while the common spirits flee when they see a man and do not wish to even be seen. So the ones who were killed in battle, they're kind of on their own. They have the white powder, the ritual white powder. They walk around and so forth. They're not afraid of anything. They'll show themselves and so forth. That's one of the Otofo, one of the ones who were killed in battle. That is the title of the Nyamma plant. The one who was killed in battle, Nyamma or Jama, had a specific plant totem associated with his clan and so forth, the Nyamma plant. And it's an Otofo plant, the kind of plant that deals with the spirit that's still powerful. Even though they were killed in battle, they're still powerful and, have influence. Now, for those who are familiar, for example, in the Yoruba tradition, you hear people throwing obi. They use coconuts for divination. That's because they didn't have access to cowrie shells that they would normally use, or cola nuts and so forth. So when they came over here, they were substituted with coconuts. If we had cowrie shells for divination in our Akan tradition on the continent in Ghana, Ivory Coast, and we don't have that when we get into North America, when we're enslaved and we escape and we want to do divination and so forth, when we go to the ocean, and Nana Epo Abena, the great mother of the ocean, says, look down by your feet, and there are cockle shells or seashells. She says, you can use those from out of my body, and you can use those for divination, just like you used to use Nserewa cowrie shells. Then we would substitute. When we came over here, certain plants existed over here that we had over there, and certain animals, but then other ones don't. We have possum bones, for example, possum bone divination in hoodoo. There are no possums in West Africa, West Africa, but there are possums over here. We find out from the Abosom, the divinity, which one of you governed this animal that we've never seen before. They tell us They show us that we can use this animal's bones to communicate with the ancestral spirits and so forth. So possum bone divination is born in North America. That's incorporated in the fabric of the Hoodoo tradition. Substitute. We came over here. The Nyamma plant didn't exist over here. It existed on the continent, but over here, that plant didn't exist. So there had to be a substitute. And there was a substitute that was used, and this is the key to everything. There was one plant that was cultivated in abundance in the Caribbean that our ancestresses and ancestors were glad to have recognized from back home in Afuraka. So you come over to this new place you've never been before, thousands of miles away, days away, many moons away. Literally, you're laying in the hold of a ship and so forth. You come out and you're in another land. You don't know how far away you are. You see animals you've never seen before, plant life you've never seen before, but then you see a plant. Hey, we have this plant back home. They were glad to see that plant. That plant is commonly called ginger root. It's a plant with a fiery disposition, connected to fiery abosom, fiery divinities. It's a vessel and transmitter of such spiritual energy when used medicinally and ritually. What is most important for our discussion is that this plant used by Okomfo, Odun Sinifo, Odumafo, Oduyefo, various classes of healers and healeresses, was readily recognized and used once we came over here. As soon as we saw it, we were like, okay, we can utilize this not only to heal ourselves, but for ritual offerings, for umdunu, ritual offerings. The name of the plant is important. Kakaduru, Kekaduru, Akakaduru, and Kakadu. Remember, du means medicine, but also means to become heavy with the spirit, to descend, to dismount, and so forth, a light on the person. The key, however, is Kaka in Akhan also equals Keka, dialectical variant, or Kaka or Kekau. So you Kaka or Keka, depending on the dialect, it's the same word. So the plant is called Kakaduru. Remember the Asante dialect, Duru is medicine, but then Kakadu, that's the Akwamu dialect. Once again, Akwamu dialect, Kakadu. That's the name of ginger in Akan. Why is that important? Keka, which is also Kaka, to bite, to sting. But then Keka also means to touch, to adorn, to dress, to touch, to fumble, to feel, or grope about. So something to touch, but also to bite. Kaka or Keka. Then Keka, irritability, fierceness, ferocity, and Keka, biting, and Keka boa, a wild beast, a beast of prey, and so forth. Akeka duru, medicine for a toothache. Example, ginger. So when you type in ginger in the Akan language on Google, you'll see kakadu or kekadu or kakaduru or kekaduru and so forth. So kaka means to bite, to chew, to bite. It also means to touch or to grab or to grope or to rub. It also means fierceness, ferocity, wild beast, and so forth. Why is that important? Because kakaru, meaning the biting root, the chewing root, the rubbing root. Now, when you listen to blues singers say, I went down to Memphis, I got my Johnny Conqueror. They thought it was Johnny Conqueror root, High John the Conqueror root. Sometimes Muddy Waters will say, my Johnny Conqueror. Bo Diddley will say, I got that Johnny Conqueror. When they talk about High John the Conqueror, they say, I'm biting, I'm chewing on my root. Or they say, I'm rubbing on my root. Kaka means to bite. Kaka means to rub, to touch. But kaka also means fierce, irrepressible, wild beast, and so forth. When you chew or bite or rub this root, you develop that fierce, fiery, explosive, irrepressible energy. Kaka do or kaka duru. Kakaru in Akwamu, in a regular sentence, is kakaru, and then Kakaduru, and Asante is Kakaduru. So Johnny Kakaduru is the Johnny Conqueror root. High John the Conqueror root is Johnny Kakaduru or Jama Kakaduru. But then Johnny Conqueror, as Bodilli says, is the Akwamu dialectical variant. Johnny or Jama Kakaduru, and that is Kakaduru. So that is His Highness Yasafo Hini, the chief, the king of Hini, of Yasafo, the warriors, His Highness Jama Kakaduru, Jama's Kakaduru, or Jama's fighting, biting, touching medicine. His spirit went into that root. It's called Kakaduru. He's Jama. The plant is called Kakaduru. This is where you get, the Europeans called him Johnny. This is where you get Johnny Kakaduru and Johnny Conqueror root. It's the same word. It has the same meaning, but it has a cosmological meaning. When you break down the terms, it's the exact word with the exact same meaning that you find in Akan, that you find in the Hoodoo tradition, and carries the same cosmological meaning in the context of there's a royal individual who was a warrior, who was irrepressible. When his spirit, when he died, he said his spirit would go into his plant totem. He was in Jama. The plant is in Jama, but the Jama plant did not exist over here. So they used the substitute for the Njama plant, which was the Kakaduru. And this is why we still say, I need a Johnny Kakaduru, conquer root. And the whites in our spring assumed that we were saying High John the Conqueror root, or the conquer root, and so forth. It's never been the case. But when you understand Akan Ancestral Religion, you understand that. The Jalap root is a later interpolation. This Jala root coming from the west near Mexico and, Texas and so forth, and coming into Hoodoo, people would say, well, how did the Jala root that originates in the west get into, people talking about, High John the Conqueror in South Carolina? It's a later interpolation. It had nothing to do with the original root, but they don't know that, quote unquote, High John the Conqueror or Jama, King Jama, is an Akwamu Akan ancestor that we actually still invoke. And he asks for Kakaduru. And we've been giving him Kakaduru for over 20 years. He's a direct blood ancestor of our people that we know exactly who he is, what his name is, where he came from, what year he came, how many people came with him, what he did, what his plant was, and so forth. Everybody else is like, oh, he might have been a prince. He may have come from the Congo. He may have just been a mythical character. They don't know the tradition, but we know the tradition. And it takes somebody from the Akwamu nation, because we are Akwamu, to talk about our Akwamu ancestor who gave this name to this, this root. Now, there's the final piece with regard to that is, if you look at, St. John and St. Thomas are just a few miles away from each other, so they were being developed at the same time. Sometimes they would capture the people would get on land in St. John, and then they'll take them a couple of miles over to St. Thomas to work the fields, or they'll be on St. Thomas and they'll bring them to St. John and so forth, because they were still in development and all of that. So after everything happened with the Great Akwamu Revolt, and they committed suicide and they had the plan and so forth, that shook up the entire island. It's still being written about today. They've done documentaries about it and so forth. That was the biggest revolt in the Western Hemisphere at that time. And it shook the, confidence of the whites in our spring. So that was still happening. Those stories were still being passed on intergenerationally right there on the islands. The sister islands of St. John and St. Thomas. Very often our people were seasoned in those areas, and then they were brought to Mississippi, brought to Alabama, brought to Georgia and so forth. And then sometimes you have people who came in a different route. How did High John the Conqueror root or Jama Kakaduru come into, North America? One example, the individual that they call Telemake or Denmark VC, we call Okufo Kwabena. He was of Kuramanti ancestry. When they use the term Kuramanti, that's actually Kuramansi in today's Ghana, as a port in today's Ghana. The whites in our spring very often, when they're talking about people who are enslaved, they'll say they'll just call all of the Akan people, they'll say those are the Kuramantis. In Jamaica, they say Kuramanti. In Suriname, amongst the people who practice Akan religion, they say the Kuramanti spirits and so forth. So when they say Kuramanti ancestry, they're talking about Akan ancestry. He was Kuramanti, he was Akan. Denmark Vesey, Okufo Kwabena, warrior Kwabena, he organized the largest revolt in the true history of the United States. Over 9,000 Afro-Akani people. They were going to overthrow, slavery in South Carolina and take over. Now, he was the most popular figure. He came from St. Thomas. That's where he was born and so forth, but then he ended up coming into the United States. He was one of the most famous, of course, individuals who from the enslaved in the Caribbean and then came into the United States. But there were many who were forced into the United States from the Caribbean, from St. John's Island. Some of those who revolted there, they wanted to send them somewhere where they felt like they could not revolt. If you're on an island and you live in a tropical area and you're surrounded by water and so forth, that still kind of reminds you of being in Afro-Akad in Africa. There's a larger population of people enslaved speaking the same language. They will put them in the same areas, speaking the same language from the same groups. In North America, they drop you off in Mississippi, you're landlocked. They would make sure that the people who spoke, the same language, they would separate them. If you're Akan, I'm gonna stick you with a Yoruba person or somewhere else, or Igbo person, so you all could not communicate. You couldn't share information. You couldn't share language and so forth. They isolated you. It was more controlled. They wouldn't allow drums to be played. They wouldn't allow ritual singing and dancing and so forth, unless you looked like you were doing it in a church. It was a different kind of structure in North America. So sometimes those who revolted, they'll send them up to North America. They would seize them down there, or they were like, we need to get them away from here. So they ended up in North America. He was one of the most famous, of course, but there were many. This is how Nyamma Kakaduru, Jama's Kakaru, or Conqueror root, Kakaduru, came from the south into the Caribbean, into North America. We continue to utilize that. That Jala root comes over 100 years later. They started utilizing that. And now people, when they're selling High John the Conqueror and they're selling that Jala root, you're wasting your time and wasting your money if you think that's what it is. So, and of course, Europeans are selling it and having little hoodoo shops online and all kinds of nonsense. But in reality, we know who our direct ancestor, one of the Nsamanfo, is. We know his name, where he came from, how old he was, what he did, how he died, what plant totem was connected to him, the name of the plant, and everything else. This is information that's the real hoodoo tradition. This is what we're talking about. This is why the Akan identity of the tradition is key, or else people start incorporating all kinds of nonsense that has nothing to do with the tradition. Okay. So once again, Yerase, we thank you for joining us for our 6th annual Hoodoo Mayn Hoodoo Nation Festival online. And Yebeshabio, we will meet again. Ptah.